The unexpected return. Gregory Whitman was not the kind of man people expected to show up unannounced. The billionaire had built an empire of steel, glass, and power. His schedule was usually tighter than the bolts in his skyscrapers. Assistants checked his flights. Secretaries managed his every move. If he came home, it was planned weeks in advance. Staff would polish the chandeliers, the chef would prepare an exotic menu, and his mansion would stand ready to welcome its king. But on that cloudy afternoon, Gregory came home without telling a soul. The Whitman estate was silent when his black car rolled up the stone driveway. Even the fountain, usually spraying sparkling arcs of water, looked dull in the gray light. Gregory stepped out, his tall figure sharp in a tailored suit. His expression was unreadable, but inside his chest, something heavy stirred. He hadn't seen his daughter, Sophia, in almost 3 weeks. 3 weeks filled with back-to-back board meetings, mergers, and dinners with men who only spoke in numbers. He told himself it was necessary, that he was building her future, that absence was just the cost of empire. But as he entered his own mansion, he realized he didn't hear her. No soft giggles, no tiny footsteps, only the hush of marble hallways. "Mr. Whitman," a voice came from the kitchen. One of the cooks peeked out, startled to see him. "We didn't know you'd be home today." "That's the point," Gregory muttered. He didn't want ceremony. He didn't want announcements. He wanted to see what happened in this house when no one expected him. He moved quietly through the wide halls, his shoes clicking softly against polished floors. The air smelled faintly of lavender and soap. Somewhere upstairs, faint humming floated down like a fragile thread of sound. It wasn't the sound of a professional singer. It was soft, warm, imperfect, the kind of humming G that came only from someone soothing a child. Gregory's brow furrowed. He climbed the stairs, each step echoing in the silence. The humming grew clearer. It wasn't coming from the nursery. It wasn't coming from the playroom. It was coming from the master bathroom, the one connected to his late wife's suite. His chest tightened. No one went in there, not even him. He rarely set foot in that part of the house because it hurt too much. That room carried too many memories, of laughter long gone, of perfume that still seemed trapped in the curtains, of promises that death had stolen. Yet now, someone was in there. Gregory's steps quickened, his jaw clenched, and then he heard it. A splash of water followed by a high-pitched giggle, his daughter's voice. He froze outside the door. For a moment, something warm stirred in him. Sophia was laughing. It was the sweetest sound he had heard in months. But the warmth vanished as soon as he realized someone else was with her, someone who had no right. He pushed the door open. The scene hit him like lightning. Sophia sat in a porcelain bathtub, her curly brown hair wet and dripping. She splashed her tiny hands against the warm water, her face glowing with joy. And kneeling beside her, holding a small towel and humming softly, was Maya Williams, the maid. A black maid. Gregory's blood ran hot. His voice erupted before he could stop it. "No one touches my daughter when I'm not here, especially not you." The words sliced through the air like knives. Maya froze. The towel slipped in her trembling hands. Her eyes widened, her mouth parted, but no words came out. Her heart hammered against her chest so hard she thought it might break her ribs. For one unbearable second, silence filled the bathroom. Sophia blinked at her father, then clung tighter to Maya's arm as though sensing the storm that had entered the room. Gregory's tall frame filled the doorway, his sharp eyes burning with suspicion and something else, anger, fear, maybe even grief. He didn't move closer, but his presence seemed to swallow the space. Maya found her voice, though it shook. "Mr. Whitman, don't." His hand sliced the air, cutting her words. Not another word. Her throat tightened. She wrapped the towel quickly around Sophia's little body and lifted her gently from the tub. Her arms were steady, even though the rest of her was trembling. She knew if she faltered, if Sophia slipped even an inch, Gregory would never forgive her. The billionaire's eyes followed every move like a hawk watching a trespasser. Maya turned, clutching Sophia close, and whispered softly, "It's okay, baby. Daddy's here." But Sophia didn't run to her father. She buried her wet face in Maya's shoulder and whispered something only Maya could hear. Gregory saw the gesture, and for the first time in years, a blade of something sharper than anger cut into him. His daughter, his only child, clung to the maid instead of him. His fists clenched. "Maya," he said again, his tone lower but no less sharp. "Put her down." Maya hesitated, her lips pressed tight, her arms instinctively tightening around Sophia. She didn't mean to disobey, but everything in her body screamed that handing Sophia over while she was shivering and crying would feel like betrayal. Her heart pounded. What should she do? She looked at Gregory, then down at Sophia, then back again. "I'm sorry," she whispered, finally lowering her eyes. "I only wanted to help. She had a fever. She was uncomfortable. I thought—" "You thought?" Gregory's voice thundered again. "You are paid to clean this house. Nothing more. Nothing less." Maya flinched as if struck. But Sophia whimpered and Gregory's fury faltered for the briefest second. He hadn't heard that sound in so long ago. The fragile cry of a child who didn't want him near. He looked at Maya again. The sight of her kneeling by the tub moments ago burned in his mind. She hadn't looked like a maid then. She had looked like a mother. The thought unsettled him. "Get out," he said coldly. "Both of you, now." Maya nodded quickly, clutching Sophia close. She carried the child out of the bathroom, her footsteps light but hurried. Gregory stayed behind, staring at the empty tub, at the ripples of water still trembling from Sophia's splashes. He should have felt in control. He should have felt like the master of his home. But instead, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like a stranger in his own house, and it terrified him. A father's distance. The night after Gregory Whitman came home unannounced, the mansion carried a weight that even silence could not hold. The Whitman estate had always been quiet, but that night it was a silence full of cracks, a silence that held unsaid words, unexpressed emotions, and unacknowledged truths. Gregory lay awake in his grand master bedroom, the same room he had once shared with his late wife, staring at the carved ceiling panels that seemed too ornate, too empty, too cold. His body was heavy from exhaustion, but his mind was restless, replaying the image that had greeted him upstairs. Maya Williams kneeling beside the porcelain tub, her hands gentle, her voice humming like a secret song, and Sophia, his daughter, glowing with laughter that he himself had not been able to bring out in months. The image struck him with equal parts jealousy and shame, and the conflict gnawed at him until sleep would not come. Gregory had buried himself in business after his wife's death. He had told himself it was the only way to cope, the only way to ensure Sophia's future was secured. He had built towers that kissed the clouds, sealed, deals that reshaped industries and earned numbers so large they barely felt real anymore. Yet for all that power, he could not master the simplest thing, being a father to a little girl who had lost her mother before she could even remember her face. Every time he looked at Sophia, he saw echoes of his wife, the same dark eyes, the same delicate curve of the chin, the same soft curls that tumbled freely, and each resemblance was like a knife, cutting into wounds he had never healed. So Gregory did what he did best. He distanced himself. He convinced himself that surrounding Sophia with staff, tutors, and a house filled with luxury would make up for the absence of his presence. He rationalized that children adjusted quickly, that she would grow strong because of the legacy he was building. Yet in the quiet hours of night, when boardrooms were empty and skyscrapers no longer demanded his attention, a whisper of guilt followed him. A whisper that said his little girl needed more than gifts and trust funds. She needed him. But by the time the whisper reached him, he was already too tired, too broken, or too proud to act. Maya Williams had never planned to become the center of Sophia's world. She had applied for the maid's job 2 years earlier, not out of ambition but necessity. Her mother's health had been declining rapidly, and hospital bills stacked like bricks against her small paycheck from a grocery store job. When she saw the Whitman estate's notice for housekeeping staff, she applied without expectation. She was young, quiet, and careful, the kind of worker the Whitman managers thought would blend into the background of the enormous mansion. They never guessed that Sophia would notice her, or that noticing would turn into clinging, and clinging would turn into trust deeper than anyone imagined. At first, Maya kept her distance. She was there to clean, not to interfere. But Sophia was different from the other children she had known in her neighborhood. The little girl didn't laugh freely or chatter endlessly. She moved through the hallways like a ghost wrapped in curls and expensive dresses, holding dolls but never talking to them, wandering gardens but never chasing butterflies. The first time Maya had seen her, she thought Sophia looked like a child locked inside an invisible glass case, present but unreachable. And something in Maya's heart couldn't bear it. One afternoon, while dusting the edges of a bookcase, she had started humming absent-mindedly, an old tune her mother used to sing while folding laundry. It was nothing special, just a melody passed down through generations, wordless and soft. But when she turned, she saw Sophia standing at the doorway, her big eyes wide, listening as though she had discovered a secret treasure. Without a word, Sophia stepped closer, closer still, and sat cross-legged on the rug, watching Maya's lips move with the tune. Maya felt awkward, but she kept humming, and to her astonishment, Sophia leaned against the wall and closed her eyes, as if the sound wrapped her in safety. From that day, something subtle began. Whenever Maya hummed, Sophia would appear. Whenever Maya cleaned the nursery, Sophia would follow. Little by little, a bond grew. Not spoken, not planned, but undeniable. By the time Gregory noticed, it was already too late. Sophia trusted Maya in ways she didn't trust anyone else. When she scraped her knee, she ran not to the butler, not to the nanny, not even to her father during his rare visits, but to Maya. When she had nightmares, she whispered Maya's name through the halls until the young maid came rushing. And when she finally started speaking full sentences again, it was Maya who heard them first. Gregory had missed all of it, lost in skyscrapers and private jets. Now, after what he had witnessed in the bathroom, Gregory's pride was screaming. He was the father, yet his daughter turned her face away from him. He was the protector, yet she clung to someone else. His mind hardened, telling him Maya had overstepped, that she had stolen a place she was never meant to fill. Yet his heart, the same heart he had trained himself to silence, whispered another truth. Maybe Maya had not stolen anything at all. Maybe she had simply given Sophia something Gregory himself had not. The next morning, Gregory came down to breakfast, his face as unreadable as a banker's ledger. The long dining table, polished to a shine, held plates of food carefully arranged by the chef. But what drew his eye wasn't the silver or the china. It was Sophia sitting in her chair, her small feet swinging above the floor. And beside her, as always, was Maya, cutting the child's pancakes into neat squares, her voice gentle as she coaxed her to eat. Gregory paused at the doorway, unseen for a moment. Sophia's laughter bubbled out when Maya made a silly face, and the sound was so pure, so unguarded that Gregory felt it pierce something inside him. He remembered the last time he had made Sophia laugh like that, and he could not recall it. He cleared his throat, and both heads turned. Maya's smile faded instantly, replaced with the stiff, polite expression of a servant caught doing too much. Sophia, however, lit up. "Daddy!" she squealed, though she did not run to him. She stayed rooted to her chair as though uncertain whether she was allowed to. Gregory forced a smile, one that felt foreign on his face. "Good morning, Sophia," he said, his voice softer than the night before. Maya started to rise, murmuring, "I'll prepare your plate, sir." "No," Gregory said sharply, then caught himself. His tone softened slightly. "Sit. Continue with her. I'll serve myself." Maya blinked in surprise, but obeyed. Gregory poured himself coffee, his movements precise, but his eyes never left the scene at the table. The maid and his daughter, side by side, eating breakfast as though they were a family he himself was not part of. It stirred jealousy, but also something else. Longing. Later that day, Gregory walked through his office, files spread before him, but the numbers swam meaninglessly. His mind kept drifting back to the way Sophia had clung to Maya after the bath. It unsettled him, but also planted a seed of curiosity. That night, when the house had grown quiet again, Gregory wandered upstairs without purpose, only to pause outside Sophia's room. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, the glow of a small lamp cast soft light on the walls. He could hear Maya's voice reading a story in her calm, lilting tone. Sophia's tiny giggles punctuated the tale, and then came the humming again, the same tune Gregory had heard before. He stood there, hidden in the shadows, listening longer than he meant to. For the first time in years, he realized he was not hearing silence in his house. He was hearing life. But pride is a heavy chain, and Gregory was not yet ready to admit what his heart knew. He walked away before they noticed him, his jaw tight, his chest conflicted. Still, one truth followed him like an echo. His daughter had found comfort in the arms of a maid, and he was powerless to change that fact. And though he told himself he hated it, a deeper part of him, one he had long ignored, wondered if perhaps it was not something to hate at all. Cracks in the ice. The days following Gregory's unannounced return carried with them an atmosphere that was both uneasy and charged with something unspoken. The staff walked more carefully, whispering in the hallways, uncertain of their employer's mood. Everyone in the mansion could sense it. Gregory, Whitman, the untouchable billionaire whose presence usually lasted only long enough to sign papers or issue orders, had suddenly settled into the house like a storm cloud that refused to pass. He walked the halls at odd hours, his footsteps echoing against the marble, his eyes sharp and searching. He sat at the breakfast table more often than before, lingering not because of the food, but because of the company. Yet in those moments, he was not truly part of the life unfolding around him. He was an observer standing just outside the circle, watching, measuring, and struggling with emotions he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Maya noticed his presence everywhere, though she tried to appear unaffected. She moved about her duties quietly, polishing silver, folding laundry, arranging flowers in the grand vases. But she could feel his eyes sometimes, heavy on her back as though he were trying to solve a puzzle that had no simple answer. She never sought his approval nor his attention, yet his watchfulness unsettled her. She knew the mistrust he carried in his heart, the suspicion that she had crossed a line in caring for Sophia as she did. And though she believed she had done nothing wrong, the weight of his authority pressed down on her shoulders like an invisible burden. For Sophia, however, nothing had changed. The little girl still followed Maya like a shadow, her tiny hand curling into the maid's fingers whenever they walked through the gardens, her small voice asking for another story at bedtime, her laughter filling rooms that had long grown stale with silence. If anything, Sophia grew bolder, because Gregory's presence seemed to stir something inside her. She no longer wandered the halls like a ghost. Instead, she seemed more alive, as though determined to show her father the joy she had found in the company of someone else. The turning point came one night when Sophia fell ill. It began with a faint flush on her cheeks and a restless stirring in her sleep. Maya noticed immediately, her instincts sharp from years of watching over her younger cousins and from the quiet attentiveness that came from being raised in a family where care was given, not purchased. She touched Sophia's forehead gently and felt the warmth. Not burning hot, but enough to raise concern. She sat beside the child through the night, sponging her forehead with cool water, humming softly when she whimpered, whispering comfort even when Sophia was too drowsy to hear. Gregory discovered them by accident. He had returned late from his office study, where he had attempted to bury himself in contracts and market forecasts that refused to distract him. His thoughts kept circling back to his daughter, to the way she had clung to Maya after the bath, to the sound of that humming that still haunted his ears. Unable to rest, he wandered the halls, and when he passed Sophia's door, the glow of lamplight and the faint sound of voices drew him closer. He pushed the door open just enough to see inside. What he saw stopped him cold. Sophia lay on her small bed, her cheeks flushed, her breathing soft but uneven. Maya sat on the edge, a damp cloth in her hand, brushing it gently over the girl's forehead. Her eyes were steady, her posture calm, but her entire being radiated focus and care. There was no trace of irritation, no sign of weariness. Though Gregory knew she had already worked a full day, she looked like someone who had claimed the responsibility not because she was told to, but because her heart could not allow her to do otherwise. For several minutes, Gregory stood silently, watching. He could not deny what his eyes told him. Maya was patient in a way he could never be, soothing in a way he had never learned, attentive in a way money could not buy. And when Sophia stirred in her sleep, whispering through her fevered dreams, her small lips formed a name. Not daddy, not even mommy, a word she rarely remembered to use. She whispered, Maid. The sound hit Gregory like a blow to the chest. He staggered back a step, though no one noticed him. His pride roared in protest, telling him this was unacceptable, that no maid should ever command such devotion from his child. But another voice, a quieter, buried voice, whispered the truth. Sophia clung to Maya not because she was disloyal, but because she had found safety where Gregory had failed to provide it. That truth was harder to swallow than any insult. Later, when Maya finally left the child's side to fetch fresh water, she nearly jumped to see Gregory in the shadows of the hallway. For a moment, her breath caught, expecting his anger to fall on her again, but his face was unreadable, a storm of emotions held tightly behind the walls he had built around himself. You should not be here this late, he said finally, his voice low. I couldn't leave her, Maya replied, her own voice steady though her heart pounded. She needs someone by her side. Gregory's eyes flicked toward the door where his daughter slept, then back to Maya. He wanted to accuse her of overstepping again, to remind her of her place, but the words died in his throat. He had seen what he had seen, and denying it would only deepen the chasm between him and the truth. Instead, he said nothing. He only nodded once, curtly, and stepped away, leaving Maya to return to her watch. But the image of that night stayed with him. Even as the fever broke and Sophia returned to her usual self, Gregory could not shake the memory of his daughter's whispered word. He found himself haunted not by the power he wielded in boardrooms, but by the helplessness he had felt in that hallway, standing useless while a maid did what he himself could not. The cracks in the ice around his heart had begun to form, though he fought against them with every ounce of pride. He told himself that Maya's presence was danger, that she threatened to blur lines that must remain clear. Yet, in his silence, he could not deny the other truth that rose like dawn over dark waters. Without Maya, Sophia would be lost, and perhaps he would be too. The clash, the fragile calm that had settled over the Whitman mansion after Sophia's fever did not last long. It was a calm that existed only on the surface, like still water hiding the currents below. Gregory tried to maintain his old composure, the cool, calculating man of business who measured everything in terms of control. But deep inside, the image of Maya sitting by Sophia's bed gnawed at him. He told himself she had done what any caretaker would do, that her attentiveness was nothing more than duty. Yet he knew the truth. It was not duty that had kept her awake through the night. It was love. And the fact that his daughter had whispered her name instead of his own was a wound he could not ignore. Maya sensed his unrest. She saw it in the stiffness of his jaw whenever their eyes met, in the silence that seemed to carry more weight than words, in the way his presence pressed down on her whenever he entered a room. She had not asked for his attention, nor his suspicion, yet both followed her like shadows. She carried on with her tasks, sweeping the grand staircase, polishing the silver, folding Sophia's clothes. But she felt his eyes even when he was not in the room. And though she wanted to shrink into the background, she could not because Sophia would not let her. The little girl clung to her hand in the garden, called her name during meals, and refused to sleep unless Maya's voice told her a story. The bond was no longer subtle, it was undeniable, and it placed Maya squarely in the center of Gregory Whitman's storm. The breaking point came one evening in the library. The Whitman Library was a massive room lined with shelves that reached the ceiling, its tall windows draped in heavy curtains, its silence broken only by the crackle of fire in the hearth. Gregory had retreated there after a long day of calls, his mind restless and his temper short. He sat in a leather armchair, a glass of scotch untouched beside him, staring at papers he could not bring himself to read. Numbers and contracts had always been his refuge, but tonight they gave him no shelter. His thoughts were elsewhere, upstairs, in Sophia's room, where Maya was likely humming that tune again. It was then that the door creaked open, and Maya stepped inside, carrying a small tray with tea. She had not known he was there. Her footsteps faltered when she saw him, but she steadied herself quickly, her face calm. "Forgive me, sir," she said, her voice low. "I only came to leave this." She set the tray on the side table, intending to leave as quietly as she had come. But Gregory's voice stopped her. "Maya." She turned, her hands clasped before her, her posture respectful yet not weak. "Yes, Mr. Whitman?" His eyes narrowed. "Why do you do it?" She frowned slightly. "Do what, sir?" "You know what I mean," he snapped, rising from his chair. His tall frame loomed, the firelight casting sharp shadows across his face. "You go beyond your role. You are not here to raise my daughter. You are not her mother. You are not her nanny. And yet you act as though she belongs to you." Maya's heart thudded, but she held his gaze. She had endured suspicion before, prejudice before, but something in her was tired of shrinking. She took a breath, steadying her voice. "I do not act as though she belongs to me, sir. I only act as though she matters." His jaw tightened. "She matters to me. Then why is it that she turns to me when she is afraid?" Maya's words came sharper than she intended, but once they were out, she could not call them back. "Why is it my name she whispers at night? Why is it my arms she clings to when she cries?" The room went still, Gregory's hands clenched at his sides. The truth in her words cut him, though he wanted to deny it. "Because you have overstepped," he growled. "You have taken advantage of her innocence, of her need. You have placed yourself where you do not belong." Maya's eyes burned, but not with fear, with fury. "I did not place myself anywhere. She came to me. She needed comfort, and I gave it. Would you rather I had walked away while she trembled? Would you rather I had left her sick, alone, and crying for someone who never came?" His breath caught. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to him, not with deference or polished flattery, but with raw, unvarnished truth. It stunned him. Maya stepped closer, her voice trembling now, not from fear, but from emotion held too long. "I did not come to this house to challenge you. I came because I needed work, because my mother is sick and I had no choice. But Sophia is a child who lost her mother before she could understand what that loss meant. She needed someone to hold her, to sing to her, to remind her that love is still here, and if that makes you think I have overstepped, then so be it. But I will not apologize for caring for a little girl who deserves more than silence and shadows." Her words echoed in the vast library, hanging between them like smoke. Gregory stared at her, his chest rising and falling with breaths he did not realize he was holding. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not partners, not rivals, not employees. And yet here stood a maid, trembling but unbroken, daring to lay bare the truth he had spent years refusing to face. For a long moment he said nothing. His eyes walked toward the fire as though searching for answers in the flames. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, though no less sharp. "You think you know what she needs." "I don't just think it," Maya whispered, her eyes wet but steady. "I see it, every day, every night, and so could you, if you let yourself." The words landed heavy. Gregory turned away, his hand brushing his forehead as though trying to erase them. He could not admit she was right. His pride would not allow it. Yet the truth had already pierced him, and there was no sealing that wound. Maya bowed her head slightly, her voice softening. "I will leave, if you ask me to. But know this, it will not be me you hurt. It will be her." With that, she turned and left the library, her footsteps fading into the hall. Gregory stood alone in the glow of the fire, his heart pounding, his pride shattered, and his mind caught in a storm. He had always believed control was his greatest strength, but now he wondered if control was the very thing that was breaking him apart. A daughter's voice. The mansion had always been a place of grandeur. Tall ceilings that swallowed echoes, chandeliers that glimmered like frozen stars, polished marble floors that reflected wealth in every direction. But after that night in the library, it seemed to Maya as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. The clash between her and Gregory had left a mark that no amount of silence could erase. She carried on with her work, but her hands felt heavy on the silver trays. Her heart throbbed with unease as she folded Sophia's dresses, and even her humming was quieter than before. She knew she had spoken words that could not be taken back. She had defended the child as if she were her own, but in doing so, she had challenged a man who was not accustomed to being challenged in his own home. Gregory, for his part, was restless. He moved through his mansion with the pace of a man both unsettled and unwilling to admit why. He told himself he had let Maya's words get under his skin only because they were insolent, because no servant should ever dare speak to him with such defiance. But deep in the private recesses of his heart, the part he rarely looked at himself, he knew her words carried truth. He had heard it in her voice, seen it in her eyes, felt it in the way she spoke of Sophia. That was no performance. It was raw, unpolished, and piercingly real. And he hated that reality had exposed his own failure. It was Sophia who carried the weight of it most directly, though she did not fully understand the conflict. She was only 4, but children have a way of sensing tension long before they can name it. She saw the stiffness in her father's shoulders when Maya entered a room. She saw the way Maya's eyes lowered quickly, as though bracing for rebuke. And she felt in her small heart that something precious was being pulled apart. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the playroom, Sophia sat on the rug with a set of wooden blocks. Maya was beside her, quietly folding clean linens into neat piles. Sophia stacked the blocks carefully, her tongue peeking out in concentration, but her eyes kept flicking to the door. She asked suddenly, her voice quiet but clear, "Maya, why is Daddy angry with you?" The question made Maya's hands pause mid-fold. She forced a small smile, though her chest tightened. "He's not angry with me, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups just disagree." Sophia frowned. "But he looks at you like he's mad. Did you do something bad?" Maya's throat tightened. How could she explain the complexity of pride, grief, and prejudice to a child? She set the linens aside and turned fully to Sophia, brushing a curl away from her forehead. "No, little one. I didn't do anything bad, and neither did your daddy. He just doesn't always understand." Sophia tilted her head. "Understand what?" Maya hesitated, then whispered, "Understand. And how much you need love every day, not just sometimes." The words lingered in the air, soft but sharp. Sophia absorbed them silently, her small fingers fiddling with a block. Then she whispered something that caught Maya off guard. "I wish Daddy could be like you." Before Maya could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hall. Gregory's tall frame filled the doorway, his expression unreadable. He had heard enough to know the weight of what had been said. His eyes flicked from his daughter to Maya, and the tension that had been simmering for weeks finally reached its boiling point. "Maya," he said, his voice clipped, "leave us." Maya swallowed hard, then nodded, rising slowly. But as she turned to go, Sophia scrambled up and ran to her, clutching her skirt tightly. "No!" the little girl cried, her voice trembling. "Don't go, Maya, please. I want you here." Gregory froze. The words hit him harder than any insult, sharper than any accusation. His daughter's voice, so small yet so certain, had spoken the truth he had refused to face. Maya bent down, her hands gently stroking Sophia's hair. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'll be back. Daddy just wants time with you." But Sophia shook her head violently, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, I want you to stay. I don't want Daddy to send you away. Please don't let him, Maya." The room stilled. Gregory stood rooted, his pride demanding that he insist, that he reassert his authority. But his heart cracked at the sight of his daughter's desperation. She had barely spoken since her mother's death, had often hidden in shadows of silence, but now her words came rushing out in sobs, raw and unfiltered. She clung to Maya as if letting go meant losing safety itself. Gregory's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to say something that would steady the storm, but words deserted him. His entire life had been built on control. Control over business, control over wealth, control over every outcome. But here, in the middle of his own mansion, he had none. His daughter had chosen someone else's embrace, someone else's love over his. Maya looked up at him, her own eyes shimmering, but there was no defiance this time. Only sorrow, only the unspoken plea that he open his eyes and see what was right in front of him. She did not move, did not pry Sophia's small hands from her skirt. She simply stayed, waiting to see what he would do. Gregory swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on his daughter. Her sobs softened into hiccups, her tiny fingers clutching desperately. For the first time, he knelt down. His expensive suit creased against the rug, his hands awkwardly reaching for Sophia. He whispered, his voice strained, "Sophia, Daddy's here." But Sophia only turned her face deeper into Maya's shoulder. The rejection was like a knife twisting in Gregory's chest. He closed his eyes, his jaw trembling with the effort to contain what he had never allowed himself to feel, the crushing weight of his own failure as a father. And in that silence, in that wound laid bare, a decision began to take root. He could cling to his pride and lose his daughter completely, or he could humble himself enough to allow someone else to bridge the gap between them. When he opened his eyes again, his voice was softer, though still uncertain. "Maya, stay." The word shocked even him. It was not an order, not a rebuke, not a dismissal. It was a request, almost fragile in its delivery. Sophia lifted her tear-streaked face just enough to see him, her little eyes wide with surprise. She did not run to him, not yet, but she relaxed slightly, her grip on Maya easing. And in that small gesture, Gregory saw hope. Fragile, trembling, but real. Maya nodded slowly, her own chest tight with emotion. "I'll stay," she whispered. It was the first step, small, perhaps invisible to the outside world, but monumental inside the Whitman mansion. A child had spoken, and her voice had broken through the stone walls of a man's pride. From that moment, Gregory began to see differently. Not fully, not instantly, but enough that the ice inside him began to melt. He still wrestled with jealousy, with guilt, with the sharp edges of his own pride. But he could no longer deny what was before him. Sophia needed Maya. And maybe, though he could not yet admit it aloud, so did he. Breaking walls. The Whitman estate felt different in the weeks after that pivotal afternoon in the playroom. It wasn't as if the mansion suddenly filled with laughter and warmth. Not immediately. Its walls still stood tall and cold, its vast halls still swallowed sound in a way that reminded anyone who entered of wealth more than love. But beneath the surface, something subtle had shifted. For the first time in years, Gregory was no longer just a shadow in his own home. He lingered, he observed, and little by little, he began to step into the life he had kept himself from for so long. The shift began slowly, almost awkwardly. Gregory would appear in the garden when Maya and Sophia walked there in the mornings. At first, he stood at a distance, his hands in his pockets, as though he were inspecting the roses or the fountains, but his eyes always trailed back to the little girl chasing butterflies with her clumsy, delighted steps. Sophia would notice him, pause, and then turn quickly back to Maya, uncertain. She didn't run to him, not yet, but she didn't cry either. That was progress, even if only he could feel it. One morning, while Sophia crouched near a patch of tulips trying to capture a ladybug on her finger, Gregory finally crouched down beside her. His movements were stiff, unnatural for a man who lived most of his life in boardrooms, but he forced himself to lower his towering frame to her height. "That's a fine catch," he said, his voice deeper than he meant it to be. Sophia glanced at him, her big eyes wide, then low, spoke to Maya as if seeking permission. Maya smiled softly, nodding, and only then did Sophia hold out her finger to show her father the tiny insect crawling along. Gregory's throat tightened. It was such a small thing, a child's fascination with a ladybug, but to him it felt monumental. It was the first time in so long that his daughter had offered him something willingly. He leaned closer, whispering, "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Sophia's lips curved in the smallest smile, and for Gregory, that fragile expression felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. At dinner, too, changes appeared. Gregory began taking his meals at the long dining table instead of in his office. The first night he did so, the staff looked bewildered, unsure of whether to bring extra plates or retreat altogether. But Gregory waved them away and sat at the head of the table, watching as Maya guided Sophia into her chair. There was awkwardness in the air. Sophia clutched her spoon tightly, uncertain whether to behave as she always did with Maya or to fall into silence as she often did with him. But when Maya made a quiet joke about the peas rolling across the plate like little green marbles, Sophia laughed, and Gregory found himself chuckling too. The sound startled even him. He couldn't remember the last time he had laughed at something so small. Over time, these small moments grew into something larger. Gregory began joining bedtime routines. At first, he only stood at the door, watching as Maya read stories in her calm, steady voice. Then one evening, when Sophia begged for 2 stories instead of 1, Maya looked up at him and said gently, "Perhaps Daddy could read the second." The suggestion caught him off guard. Reading bedtime stories was not part of his world. He dealt in figures, contracts, strategies. Yet the expectant look in his daughter's eyes left him no room to retreat. He sat on the edge of the bed, the book stiff in his hands. His voice stumbled at first, unfamiliar with the rhythm of fairy tales, but Sophia nestled closer against the pillows, her eyes wide with wonder. And somewhere in the middle of that clumsy reading, Gregory realized he had her attention. And for once, it wasn't because of his power or wealth. It was because, in that moment, he was simply her father. Maya watched quietly from the chair in the corner, her lips curving in a soft smile. She knew what a breakthrough this was. She had seen enough distance between fathers and children to recognize when a bridge had finally begun to form. And though she kept her gaze lowered when Gregory glanced her way, she could not hide the warmth in her eyes. But with each step forward came new revelations, not just about Sophia, but about Maya herself. Gregory began to notice things he had ignored before. He saw the tired lines under her eyes, the way she pressed a hand to her temple after long hours, the faint worry that crept into her gaze when she thought no one was watching. One evening, while passing the kitchen, he overheard her on the phone, her voice hushed but strained. "Yes, Mama, I'll send what I can at the end of the week. Please don't worry about the medicine, I'll manage. Just take it slowly, okay?" Her words lingered in his mind long after she hung up. For years, Gregory had assumed the staff existed only within the bubble of his wealth, people hired to maintain the machinery of his mansion. But hearing Maya's voice filled with such quiet desperation reminded him that she had a world beyond these walls, a world of burdens, of family, of sacrifices. The realization unsettled him. He was a man who had built fortunes on reading the weaknesses of others, on predicting their needs before they themselves understood them. Yet with Maya, he had not seen it. He had seen only the surface, a maid who had overstepped. He had not seen the daughter supporting a sick mother, the young woman carrying responsibilities far heavier than her frame suggested. Sophia, of course, was unaware of these subtleties. All she knew was that her father was suddenly present in her world, and it both thrilled and confused her. She began to include him in her games, offering him dolls to hold or blocks to stack, testing whether he would stay. Sometimes he fumbled, sometimes he grew impatient, but he stayed. That was enough for her. And when she looked up at him with her innocent eyes and whispered, "Daddy," without fear, Gregory felt a kind of triumph greater than any deal he had ever closed. But the true test came on a Saturday when Maya took Sophia into the city for a small outing. It was supposed to be simple, a walk in the park, a stop at the bookstore where Sophia loved to gaze at picture books. Gregory had agreed reluctantly, warning them to take extra precautions. Yet when a brief distraction in the crowd caused Sophia to wander just a few steps too far, panic struck like lightning. Maya's heart dropped when she turned and found the little girl missing. She rushed through the park, calling her name, her voice breaking with fear. And it was Gregory who had insisted on trailing them from a distance, who found Sophia by the fountain, her small body trembling in the crush of strangers. The moment he scooped her into his arms, Sophia burst into tears, clutching his neck with surprising strength. Maya arrived seconds later, breathless, her face pale with terror. Gregory looked at her over the child's head, and in that instant something passed between them. and understanding, raw and undeniable. They were united not by circumstance, not by wealth or work, but by love for the same child. As they walked back to the car, Gregory held Sophia tightly, his voice unsteady when he finally whispered to Maya, "I can't raise her without you." The admission stunned him as much as it did her. But it was true. He had spent years believing money could replace presence, that control could replace love. Yet in that moment, with his daughter's small arms clinging desperately to him, he knew the truth. Maya was not just a maid. She was the bridge, the anchor, the proof that Sophia could still grow in warmth despite all the cold he had allowed to surround her. And though Gregory Whitman was not a man who made confessions easily, this one was not negotiable. It was the beginning of a transformation he could no longer resist. Transformation, the days that followed the moment in the park were unlike anything the Whitman household had ever seen. For years, the estate had been run with military precision. Staff entered rooms at exact times, meals appeared on the dot, and silence hung like a curtain in the halls. But now, laughter occasionally echoed off the marble floors. A new rhythm had formed, one that did not revolve solely around Gregory's schedule or the dictates of wealth. It revolved around Sophia. And at the center of that rhythm stood two figures, her father who was finally learning to bend, and Maya, who had always known how to kneel for the sake of love. Gregory had never considered himself a sentimental man. He had built his empire on discipline and strategy, never on softness. But as the weeks unfolded, he found himself slowing down in ways he never thought possible. He began turning down certain business dinners, surprising his partners by choosing evenings at home instead of nights in penthouses or conference rooms. He began waking earlier not to dive into reports, but to walk with Sophia in the garden before breakfast. He found himself sitting at the tab and buffet and waiting for her to tell him which doll was attending the tea party that afternoon. At first it felt strange, almost uncomfortable, but the more he stayed, the less foreign it became. Maya noticed the changes quietly. She never announced them, never praised him openly, because she understood that Gregory was still fragile in his transformation. Pride was a fortress that did not fall in a day. It crumbled stone by stone, sometimes with resistance. But she also knew that for every wall that fell, Sophia grew brighter. The child who once moved through the halls like a whisper was now humming songs herself, skipping through the gardens, tugging on her father's sleeve with a boldness that once seemed impossible. Yet Gregory also began noticing something about Maya that went beyond the role she played in his daughter's life. One evening, after Sophia had gone to bed, he passed by the staff quarters and overheard Maya singing softly. The tune was the same lullaby she always hummed for Sophia, but this time it was slower, gentler, almost weary. He stood outside the door listening, realizing that the strength she carried in the daylight came at the cost of exhaustion she never allowed anyone to see. In that moment, he remembered the phone call he had overheard weeks before about her sick mother and the worry she tried to hide. The realization sank deep. Maya had been giving his daughter all of herself while carrying burdens of her own with no one to lean on. The next day, Gregory asked his private secretary for research, the best doctors in the state who specialized in Maya's mother's condition, the finest treatment centers available. When Maya received the news that her mother's care had been arranged and fully covered, she nearly collapsed. At first she tried to refuse, her pride bristling at the thought of charity. But Gregory spoke with a quiet firmness she had never heard in him before. "This is not charity," he said. "This is what you deserve for what you've given my daughter. And me." The words stunned her. They were not delivered like an order, nor like a debt being paid. They were delivered as acknowledgement, as respect. For the first time, she saw Gregory not as the untouchable billionaire, but as a man learning humility, a man trying to make right the blindness of his past. As months passed, the relationship within the mansion changed. Gregory no longer introduced Maya to visitors as the maid. When Sophia excitedly told guests, "This is Maya, she takes care of me," Gregory would add with a softened expression, "She does more than that, she's family." Those words carried weight, not only to the ears of staff but to Maya herself, who had long carried the ache of invisibility. There was one evening that sealed the transformation forever. Gregory returned from a brief trip, this time announced, though he still came home earlier than expected. As he entered the familiar master bathroom, he paused at the doorway. The scene was nearly identical to the one that had first sparked his fury months ago. Sophia splashing in the porcelain tub, curls dripping with water, laughter ringing like bells. Maya knelt beside her, towel ready, humming the same familiar tune. But this time Gregory did not freeze in anger. He did not thunder accusations. He stepped forward, removed his suit jacket, and rolled up his sleeves. He knelt beside the tub, his tall figure lowering until he was on the same level as his daughter. Maya looked up, startled, her eyes searching his face for the sharpness that had once been there. But instead, she saw something entirely different. A smile, soft and unguarded, breaking across his features. "Mind if I join?" he asked gently. Sophia squealed in delight, splashing harder, sending droplets across his shirt. Gregory laughed. A sound Maya had never heard so unrestrained. Together, the three of them remained by the tub, Maya passing G the towel, Gregory holding a toy boat steady while Sophia pushed it across the water. The scene, so ordinary, so domestic, was extraordinary for the man who had once believed control and distance were his only shields. Later that night, after Sophia was asleep, Gregory found Maya in the kitchen, tidying quietly as always. He paused in the doorway, his hands in his pockets, and for once there was no barrier in his voice. "Maya," he said, his tone low but steady. "Thank you." She looked up, surprised. "For what, sir?" "For saving her," he said simply. "For saving me, though I didn't know I needed saving. For teaching me that money can build walls, but love breaks them. And for giving my daughter the one thing I could not, until you showed me how." Maya's eyes softened, tears glimmering, though she blinked them away. She did not reply with grand words because she understood that some truths did not need repetition. She only nodded, her silence carrying the weight of acceptance. From that night forward, things were never the same. Gregory continued to change, not perfectly, not instantly, but steadily. He no longer measured his worth only in contracts and towers. He measured it in bedtime stories, in garden walks, in the sound of his daughter's laughter. He began to measure it too in the quiet strength of a woman he had once dismissed, a woman who taught him that dignity could exist even in silence, and that love often came from the most unexpected places. Years later, people would whisper about the change in Gregory Whitman. They said the once ruthless billionaire had softened, that he spoke differently, that his eyes carried something human they had not carried before. Some chalked it up to age, others to loss. But those who truly knew understood it had been the courage of a maid, the voice of a child, and the humility of a father finally learning that well-to-do means nothing without love. And in the mansion that once stood as a monument to cold success, warmth now reigned, not in chandeliers or marble, but in laughter echoing through its halls.